I want to thank everybody for joining today. I'm here with Gina, and Gina is the Director of People at Mirakl. It's a French-based company, and they also have a company headquarters in Boston. And today we're going to talk about how to harness the power of executive coaching and mentorship. And so we welcome your questions. Gina and I are going to just have a conversation today, and we welcome your questions as part of the conversation. I'll try to keep my eye on chat here as we get going to answer some of your questions. But Gina, I first want to ask you, what is Mirakl? Tell us what it is. What industry are you in?
Yes, so we are a tech company in the global space. Our headquarters is in Paris, but we do have the second headquarters in Boston, where I am sitting currently. So great to be able to travel over to Paris, but also great to have another footprint in other countries. When you look at Mirakl's product and platform that we sell, ultimately, a very clear way of explaining it is we enable companies to compete with large marketplaces like Amazon. And so when you think about Amazon's scope and how difficult it makes for other retailers to sell products, sell services globally, our platform enables them to compete on a global scale. So taking a client like Macy's and enabling them to connect to hundreds of thousands of different sellers, both large corporations like themselves and smaller mom and pop shops, to sell products on their website that they don't necessarily produce. And I think one thing during the pandemic was, houseplants. So it could enable a Macy's to immediately get connected to a houseplant seller, sell plants on their website, and just keep them really competitive in the market. So it is a very interesting product, and we are, one of the more higher caliber in the industry for the marketplace companies that are out there in the world.
And so, Gina, when you connect companies together, do you also connect people, or are you connecting the technology?
Twofold, absolutely. I think through that is the philosophy of our platform is we're community building. And so we are connecting people from across the globe. So you can be a US-based company selling a mom and pop shop from the UK. And so the limits and boundaries of distance really don't exist in the Mirakl world. And I think that's something that's pretty powerful when we look to the communities that we are bringing together, and a small mom and pop shop to be able to sell on a large corporation and get the visibility, really does amplify their abilities and really creates that strong partnership and community amongst our clients and those that are selling on their platforms.
So because we're here to talk about how to harness the power of executive coaching and mentorship, I wonder for you, as the people leader at Mirakl, how you would define human-centered leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, on a very simple level, it's people first approach. So always looking to make decisions that are based on the talent and the benefit of the talent. So I think the ways that you see that manifest in the workplace is, having robust learning and development opportunities, mobility. So taking people from internal roles and putting them in roles that they may not be qualified for, but really understand the Mirakl or company's brand to make them that transition even smoother. Performance reviews that are, of quality for anyone, whether you are, decades into your career to someone that's 1 year into their career, and just the regular cadence of compensation and merit review. That human first, human-centered leadership is enabling talent for the current season or chapter that they're in. So whether that's their own individual experience that they're working through, or every company's going through change and ambiguity. And so sometimes managing through that change too, it's how are you enabling people to weather that storm? Of course, we have internal mentorship, sponsorship, people management, but really looking to lean on outside coaching as well, for that outside sounding board and just additional resources to lever when we need a more individualized or specialized approach for, certain talents.
I loved what you said about honoring the season that people are in. When I think of human-centered leadership, I think there are 4 ways we could really honor the season people are in. One is promoting self-awareness, allowing the company to promote self-awareness for individuals. That's, aligning their values. What are the driving principles of the company and the person? I think another way that we could honor the season is for allowing people time for personal refreshment. Go for a walk, do a yoga class, take a time out, all of those things for however somebody needs to personally refresh. Another way is I think we prioritize alignment over agreement. I think a lot of times companies think, oh, gee, we have to agree on everything. And I think that's a fool's errand. I think if you can prioritize alignment around things and get people aligned as to the why over let's agree on it, that is a human-centered approach. And then the last one, I would say, the season that people are in and honoring them is creating a culture by which people can be brave. Mm. I know that some companies talk about psychological safety. I think of psychological bravery. How can people be brave in the space and the season they're in to kind of speak truth? Absolutely. Do any of those resonate?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think creating an environment where, you can fail and it's okay. And there's learnings from that. It's only going to make you more successful. So that psychological safety or environment where you can fail fast and learn fast is a culture that we have at Mirakl. But I think there are support factors that you need to your point, complement that environment to make sure that people are resetting, recharging, and they have the resources ultimately to be successful, regardless of where they are in their own individual career journey.
Okay, so I'm going to throw you a hardball here, because one of the questions I always get as a coach is, Paul, we talk about human-centered leadership. However, my senior team, my CEO, my C-suite doesn't really believe in coaching. We have to really focus on bottom line profit. So how do you, as a director of people, balance that need to have human-centered for employees and balance the needs of the organization?
Absolutely. So, I think when you look at specialized, it's creating a strategy in a way that's robust and it covers on all fronts. So regardless, again, if you're 1 year into your career to someone that's decades into their career and managing teams of teams, you have a strategy, learning and development, leadership development that touches upon all different facets of that employee life cycle and tenure. But part of that is also that individualized approach. And so I feel like that's where coaching has been very beneficial for me in my career, leveraging a resource both here at Mirakl and externally to show the benefits of how we can have a strategy and a robust plan that we follow, but then also leveraging these outside resources. And so coaching, in my experience, has been a little bit of a buzzword. And so with that, I think comes the interpretation or understanding that it's a nice to have and not always that foundational critical building blocks that you need from a people strategy or a business strategy standpoint. To get over that hump, it's the influencing those that are resistant to that change. And so if you want to do something on a larger scale, can we pilot it in a way that shows them on a smaller scale more quickly what the impact and will be of the efforts that we're trying to put forward? And so two different leaders are going to have two different outcomes that they're looking for, maybe the same outcome, but two different ways that they're looking to get there. And so it's understanding your audience in a way that's going to best resonate with them and what makes the most sense for their team if they're, pre-sales versus the post-sales, and how those are two totally different audiences that you're trying to overcome from a leadership or influencing standpoint. So I think, with coaching, you take that individualized approach, I think, to get people educated and over the hump of why we're offering coaching and the benefits that they can be. It's tailoring that approach too, whether through data sets or just through pilot programs.
So Olga's got a question that I want to ask you. However, I want to highlight a point that you just made that I think is really important in that, there are different ways to deploy coaching. There's a specialized approach. Maybe you get an executive and individual coach if a leader is resistant to coaching. Or maybe you say, great, you're working on an initiative. Let's put a coach in there to help that team or that initiative move forward. So there are different ways to honor, coaching within an organization that then aligns, the top line strategy with what the individuals want or need. So there are different ways to deploy. There's not just one way. Did I hear that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think through any process or program you're putting on, you realize that it's never going to be a one size fits all. And so how do you maintain integrity in the strategy that you've put forward, but allowing that flexibility to pull on other levers to make the most impact when needed? Because inevitably, exception or flexibility or iterations are always going to be necessary with whatever strategy you put forward.
Yeah. So, okay, Gina, Olga's got a question. She says, when you say coaching, Gina, do you mean providing your employees a coach or providing your leaders with the ability to coach?
Yeah, I think it's twofold, right? You talk about internal coaching and how employees can play that role. I think the conversation today is really that outside coaching and the difference between what that outside coach benefit and impact can be compared to an internal coach or mentor or people manager that we're leaning on to help that individual weather that, change in season. So both are beneficial and both require, I would say, different kind of training sets. I think outside coaching is really the conversation today and the impacts that we've seen and the benefits of leaning on those outside perspectives. In my experience, there's been hesitation of, well, they don't know our business. They don't know how we operate and why we operate. So how are they truly going to be beneficial to the individual? And I understand that argument, but I think it's counteracted with what are we providing internally? And then also what's the connection between the people manager and the coach to help make sure that we're all tracking towards the same, end destination at the end of the day.
Okay, so you just raised a great point that I always get asked as a coach of, have you worked in finance? Have you worked in this? Have you worked in that? And it's funny, as a coach, I'm not working in finance. I'm not working in pharma. I'm not working in whatever industry. I am working with your story as an individual, right? And so whenever I get asked that question, I always go back to, well, I work with people stories and I work with concepts that you're bringing to the table. I work with difficult situations. I work with problems you can't solve. Have I done that? Yeah, I've been doing that for years. And so this belief about how I have to really understand your industry, yeah, I as a coach, I'm not there to solve your industry problem. So Gina, for you, you've had a coach, right?
Yes.
And so what did you see or what impact did you experience after coaching?
Absolutely. So I think, I've seen the benefits of just adding the resource to the business, whether it's a stakeholder that we're working with. I think for my own personal story, transparently, I've been able to luckily work with you as a coach through AceUp, and that has been just a widely beneficial resource for me. In this past year, I've taken on the director role. I'm now overseeing other functions within the HR team that I'm familiar enough with, but don't necessarily have the expertise that I have in that talent management and talent development standpoint. So for me, I think the benefits that I've seen in the coaching is having that sounding board. So I'm on the people team. I'm supposed to have all the answers. I make myself feel like I'm supposed to have all the answers. We're never going to have all the answers. And so when I've exhausted my options and I don't feel like I could go to my mentors or, to have that regularly scheduled cadence coaching session, I can prepare and kind of save some of these topics to present with you and just having your guidance and perspective. Again, very little probably about Mirakl compared to some of the other companies or, that you've personally worked for, but still being able to provide a layer of perspective that helps me, develop and be that true leader and stepping up into this, director level role. And then just at a baseline, I'd say just confidence, to know that my approach is kind of spot on with some fine tuning based on your feedback and, your expertise. That you're providing me, just my initial confidence going into meetings, pushing back, whether it's with an executive or another key stakeholder at the business. So definitely have seen, just on my own personal standpoint, a huge benefit to having that coach and how it has, enabled me just to take on this transition a little bit more seamlessly.
Okay, so listen, in case anybody missed it, I was Gina's executive coach. It's true. I admit it. And and I didn't know anything about Mirakl. I don't know anything about her industry whatsoever. And Gina, you still found benefit in the coaching relationship, correct?
Absolutely. I apply it to the people team, my function. I've worked for many different industries, and I think it's similar for coaching. It's the same mechanics, it's like riding a bike. You know how to do it. You're just getting on a new bike and kind of learning those gears a little bit more swiftly than the gears that you're used to or the other bikes that you've been used to riding. So, it's a shame when people completely cut out an opportunity just because the expertise may not be there for the specialized industry or, skill set that they're looking to develop, because I think the well-rounded view that you've had through your experience has so much value to be added.
Okay, so then let's talk about the difference between mentoring and coaching, because you've had a mentor and clearly you've had a coach. So what do you see as the difference between mentoring and coaching?
Absolutely. I've been very fortunate. I think mentors can come in many different shapes and sizes. I have found mine through direct reporting relationships and people that I have personally worked with on a very close level for many years. For me, in my personal situation, the difference I see between coaching and mentorship is mentoring has been more of an intimate relationship. Again, I've worked very closely with these people and it kind of organically happened. I didn't necessarily get to pick out of a group of 5 people who I wanted my mentor to be. And then the other thing with mentorship is it is very much their experience that they're sharing with you of this is what has made me successful. So copy and paste and you'll be successful too, guiding me on their trail that they have followed in the past. I think coaching on the other end, through AceUp, you did get that opportunity to interview 2 different coaches. That was wildly beneficial for me as I felt like I had some decision making in it. I wasn't just assigned some random person. I really could, if it wasn't the 2 people I met with, there was another 2 people I could look to enlist as well. And I think that intro meeting, like we hit it off immediately and without, I feel like I even took tidbits away from our first intro session. So, the coaching really having that quick, immediate impact without having to necessarily have all the nitty-gritty details about my experience and where I've come from. So, if you boil it down, I think mentorship is, this is how I was successful, and coaching is, this is how we make you successful. It isn't necessarily a predetermined path that we're defining. You're defining that path, and I'm here to support you in that definition.
I couldn't have said it better. I was on a run this morning and thinking about the difference, knowing this was coming, the difference in mentoring and coaching, right? It's funny you chose path because I envisioned like us standing at the base of a mountain and a mentor would say, hey, this path to the right, I've been on this path. This is what it looks like. This is where we should go. And this is what you should do. Whereas in a coaching relationship, I would ask you, Gina, why are you at the base of this mountain? What are you hoping to achieve? Why are you doing this? Mm-hmm. Right? What is a short-term goal? What is a long-term goal here? And really try to understand and contextualize your experience as to why you want to engage on this journey.
Absolutely. And just the approach that I'm taking is what's best for me as an individual and is with my personal brand too. I think you and I had a conversation on just having a little bit more direct conversations. I go around and I try to attack things from a more delicate standpoint, again, building those, trusting relationships in the people function. But sometimes we do have to have direct conversations. And it was something I struggled with. So to talk to one person and they're like, well, just tell them the business and tell them what it is. It's like, hey, that's mentorship. Coaching was, well, what makes best sense for you? And how are you going to be able to be direct in this conversation, but still come off confident in a way? And let's talk about that path forward. So again, that coaching, that specialized, individualized approach, mentorship has so much benefits, but I think that coaching really has complemented some of the gaps you may have experienced with, certain mentorship relationships.
And so what advice would you then give to organizations, right? Specifically the L&D department looking to implement coaching? What would you say like, what do they need to know? Like, what have you learned? What do they need to know? And what would you do differently?
Absolutely. So I think whenever you're creating any program, it's what are the metrics? So what are you trying to solve for? That's always number one. Like, what's the problem? What's the obstacle or goal that you're looking to achieve? 2 is what data sets do we have to look at? So, through coaching, if you're going to put on a program or a pilot, it's soliciting the feedback after. I think Mirakl had pretty great engagement when we piloted AceUp's program to start with our employee base. I think we had 10% higher engagement for those that participated at least once per month. And so immediately we're seeing that this is a benefit that we're investing in, we're putting forward, and people are using, they're finding this exciting and they're utilizing this time. They're setting that time aside in their daily schedules. So, making sure you're looking at the metrics and then just listening to your employees as well. What are they looking for and what are their development areas? I think through our pilot, what we learned was the managers didn't have as active of a role that we wanted to, so that they could be aware of what the individual was working on too. And so we've worked with AceUp to fill in some of those gaps so that, again, the approach that we're taking for our business, specialized, it's going to be different than XYZ company that AceUp may also work with. Was helpful that there was flexibility in the approach, that it was as impactful for Mirakl as possible. And so don't hesitate to utilize these consultants and these expertise, but also making sure that it is making sense for your business and it's part of the DNA that you've created for that culture and community that you're building.
So you mentioned three things there that I think really resonate with me: the metrics, where do you engage, right? And then having kind of a flexible approach as you move forward. And Olga asked us a question. I wanted to fill in some more space here between you and I around ROI. How do you measure ROI? And you mentioned metrics. And so I'll give you a reprieve here for a minute. As a coach, I think of tangible and intangible metrics that organizations can deploy to actually measure the ROI of coaching. So Gina gave a great example earlier about having difficult conversations. Well, then that's measurable through improved retention. It's measurable through improved working relationships. It's measurable through peer and stakeholder engagement. And of course, then it's measurable in the output of a team or an individual. And so, you have to define, Gina, as you just said, what is the starting metric that you want to measure? Is it around a specific initiative? Is it around collaboration? Is it around communication? And so, for me, when I think about ROI and I think of coaching, for me, it really is about establishing that framework in the beginning and then checking in on that if you're going to do a group or team coaching engagement throughout the coaching relationship to make sure, are we on track? Did we discover something else? And now we need to measure over here. Mm-hmm. And so I think for you, I'll put it to you here, another tough question of, ROI. When you think of ROI and how you could measure, the effectiveness of our coaching relationship, do you think it was tangible? Could you measure it in terms of bottom line? Or do you think it was intangible in terms of relationships? How would you measure the ROI of our coaching?
I think it's twofold. I think you can't have tangible without intangible. You have to bring those two data sets together. While the intangible isn't necessarily measurable, it is factual data that we do lean on. So leaning on pulse surveys, leaning on those engagement results, seeing the retention data, really whatever, numerical data set you're tracking, but then complementing that with focus groups and live dialogue, collecting raw feedback through, just how was it? What's your feedback? And collecting those themes. But then to take it a step further in the intangible is that confidence, just that energy that you showcase as a result of knowing that the approach of going in to have that difficult conversation, that you're right. And this is okay to be direct. And this is in the health of the business and, in the best interest of the team. So with any program, but particularly coaching, where it is something that we're trying to really educate leadership on the importance of this and how beneficial it can be for the business, it's taking those pulse surveys, taking the engagement, looking at the retention and kind of what we're looking to accomplish, whether it's accreditation with outside survey companies like Great Place to Work is a global company, a global scale that we were recently accredited with, taking that data and then also complementing it with what we're witnessing and what we're seeing in the day-to-day, leaning on my expertise to say, I can't measure this. I can't, all I can share is my perspective, but I know that there's integrity there and that I'm, understanding the business and what the impact was just based on my, my interactions and dialogue with people.
I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, have you been asked to justify the coaching spend yet at Mirakl?
Absolutely. I think there's always a big question of why are we doing this? And then how does this fit into our larger people strategy? And sometimes when you bring in that outside vendor, that outside consultant, it can fragment the experience a little bit, but it's just educating leadership as to why we're doing this, and then ultimately showing them what the return on investment is and the benefits that we're seeing as investing in this area and maybe not in another.
Okay. Olga's got her hand up. Olga, you're full of questions today, and I love it. Let's
Oh,
hear from you.
I could have this conversation all day. Gina, I think a couple of times you've repeated, you show the ROI and the impact, but what, and you talked a little bit about what you measured, but could you be more specific? I mean, we're looking to stand something up, and I imagine we're getting asked the same questions. We're very data driven. So like, did you see retention return? How did you measure length of time? Did you do a comparative analysis with a control group? Like, I really want the dirty details, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So we ran a survey at the beginning to just get a little bit more feedback on the individuals and maybe what their development areas are. And then, of course, running that post survey again to get more feedback on what their development areas are and how we've tracked some of that improvement. With the coaching platform, there's a 360 function as well. And so collecting that 360 feedback is a starting point. Again, what does this individual need to work on? Then the rest of the individuals that are participating in the program. So, starting off on that survey, seeing where are we starting to today? What are the metrics that we're starting with? And that is that, what are the capabilities in these different leadership capabilities that we're looking to track? And then also, what is the retention for this team? If we do have retention concerns, are there leadership capabilities that we need to work on versus, another individual that's maybe enabling of you're stepping into a new role, expert path. How do you now sell to an executive and not just to a peer that you've been working with? So again, using that survey, starting with the metrics, that retention, and then the engagement piece as well. If you put on an event and no one shows up, well, was that money well spent? I think when you look at the engagement on AceUp, it's something that we put forward, and there was an immediate, with such a short time frame, an 88% engagement rate. So we knew that our efforts were being well spent there. To complement that, not only people like it, we can have free lunch, but is it resulting in the impact that we're looking to create, the environment we're looking to create? So yes, people love coaching, but is there a benefit to the business? It's taking that and doing those focus groups, getting feedback as to what was good about the program, what wasn't good about the program. And if there is gaps that we need to address, we're doing that so that, again, we're making sure that the money we're spending is being as impactful as possible. So, those were definitely the data sets that we've leaned on, and this will be an ongoing thing. I think to Paul's point earlier, we put these things in motion, and just because this worked for the last 6 months, is this going to work for the next 6 months? What season are we now heading into, and how do we have to tailor that coaching approach to better serve the chapter that the business is heading to, or the individual maybe as well.
So, this is so important. Gina brings up such an important point about defining a starting point, understanding where you are, bringing pulse survey in, and being holistic about the approach. There are many different coaching platforms out there, and some offer you, like a monthly gym membership. We're going to sign everybody up for coaching. You can go whenever you want. Okay, great, but it doesn't give you a baseline. It doesn't measure it. There's no accountability. And so you have to be really smart about what you're choosing and why you're choosing it. One of the things that I love about AceUp is we categorize our leadership competencies into 4 buckets: leading self, leading others, leading change, and leading organizations. And in my mind as a coach, I think of those as stages of life. 20s are leading self, 30s leading others, right? 40s leading change, and 50s leading organizations. And I'm not trying to be ageist here. I'm just saying, in my mind, that's kind of how I bucket this. Mm-hmm. And so, I wonder for you, Gina, when you saw the leadership competencies, a framework of, in leading self, maybe we're struggling with time management, right? Maybe, it's calendar. How full is it? When you saw those initially, how important is that to have a framework as a starting point given to you?
Absolutely. For many different reasons, I am an expert in my path, but I don't know everything. And so I think it allows me a framework to understand as to how AceUp is defining those capabilities and building their structure compared to another vendor or another outside platform coach. And then similarly is, you have companies that are scale ups and startups that don't necessarily have that expertise. And so again, to have that structure that's really buckets how AceUp is looking at the different individuals that they may be serving. When you look at coaching, it's spot on, because you can have an emerging leader who is not a people manager, who may not be a people manager for many years, but that leadership development is key. How many times have we come across someone that's early in their career and they're like, you have it, you're going to be successful someday. Mm-hmm. Those individuals are the individuals we're investing in, because we know right now they're not a leader, in the true definition, but they will be someday. And we're building upon that foundation to get them there. The leading others, if you're stepping into a new people manager position, there's a ton of learning curve that comes there. You're not just in charge of your schedule now, you're in charge of, 3 to 10 additional people and the challenges that can come there. Take that even a step further when you look at people managers of people managers and then executives. We are humans. We are always going to have development areas. I don't care if you're 1 year into your career or 10 years into your career, you're always going to have muscles that you need to learn to flex a little bit better. And I think AceUp has been a great partner in understanding how we get to that early development talent we're looking to, and how do we get to that development talent that is super tenured and still just needs to, have that forward thinking momentum and just learn some of the recent best practice that's coming into the industry too.
So for everybody listening, can you see why Gina was a joy to coach? I mean, like, so smart and so introspective and high level thinking, but yet great details. Gina, I love what you just said. I mean, it's so spot on. Just from it so resonates with me as a coach. So Doug asked a question and I want to get to it. He said, and I've got an answer to this too. So if you don't have one off the top of your head, let me know. But he says, how do you convert tracking capabilities, for example, to ROI?
Yeah, Paul, how do you kind of see those two fitting together?
Yeah, so when I think of tracking capabilities, I think when you talked about the metrics that we want to identify in the beginning, whether it was communication or whatever the metric was, what happens is in a coaching engagement is towards the middle or the end of the coaching engagement, I would ask you examples of how coaching has helped, right? And then I would ask you, great, we've identified the skill, and then give me a specific example by which the capability of, what we identified has changed. And so you might tell me, oh, I was able to, communicate with my team about this or that. Great. What was the impact to the dollar amount of what it is you were working on? So the project or the program or whatever it was. And then what percentage do you think coaching contributed to that? And so I think it's a walkthrough with a coach on a call specifically for an intangible measure around how do we actually identify the dollars tied to, the initiative that we were working on. Do you understand it differently?
Yeah, I think another way we would look at it is ultimately how is coaching enabling us to move a little bit quickly? So if, just in my experience where I had a difficult time having conversations, I would approach a meeting I wasn't not necessarily prepared for, but I didn't know the trajectory of the conversation. I wouldn't always react in that conversation. I would take space, separate, define my talking points, and then come back with my pushback. We're talking about 2 meetings right now. So if I'm equipped to go into that meeting without any information as to the topic of discussion, but still have confidence in the strategies and approaches I would lean on to push back upon initial conversation versus taking that space. I mean, you talk about how many times that happens in a day and how many meetings and time that has added up. It's, you also just look at how quickly are we moving now as a result of having this coaching and having this expertise of, okay, we know the path forward. So the ROI can sometimes be very hard to calculate we're going to move from building A to building B and we're saving $100,000 a year. It's not always super cut and dry like that. But if you're taking those tangible, the metrics that you can, that are a number figure, and then complementing it with the observations that you're seeing as a manager or as a people partner, you really start to see, not only the metrics that are changing, but also the behaviors within the organization and the environment and energy within teams too.
Right.
So, for me, it has really been an efficiency thing. And again, I'm saving time, not having to go back to meetings, getting my talking points prepared.
All right. So I want to switch gears here because we've talked a lot. It's funny. We didn't know we were doing an ROI webinar, and here we are talking about ROI, but it's so important, right? People always want to know, especially people that are implementing coaching.
Big time.
So here's another one for you. How do you ensure that the top-down approach in scaling an organization is balanced with bottom-up feedback and input to foster a culture of inclusivity and collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, culture starts at the top. If you don't have your senior leadership engaged in the efforts that you're putting forward, but also embedded in those efforts too. It's one thing to talk the walk. It's a different thing to walk the walk. And so if we're sharing one things, those are words. When you see leaders acting, that's visual, and those are actions. So really complementing that, what we're sharing, leadership is embodying those principles. So really, of course, it starts at the top down. That said, you don't want just a super hierarchical where it says starts at the top and trickles all the way down. You want to make sure you're also getting feedback from the bottom up. So through those pulse surveys, those exit interviews that you're, verbally having, the exit surveys that you're pulling, those outside accreditations through, we have the Boston Business Journal, Boston Globe's Best Place to Work, great place to work on a global scale that you apply for. Take that feedback and put it into action. You're not going to change it overnight. We're still going to have development areas. Feedback that we get today still may be resonated when we get here this time next year. But as long as we know some of what we are putting forward from strategy and approach is to touch upon some of the development areas of the business, is key. You want to see that they're sharing feedback and that you're acting on it. The one other thing I think is touching upon is the communication and that transparency. I think that kind of goes hand in hand. We're not going to be able to change everything overnight. It's never going to happen. Again, this time next year, we'll probably have similar themes that are coming out for the feedbacks that we're receiving. But it's being open and transparent with those employees, that you hear them, you acknowledge that this is not right or perfect, but that you're working on it. And again, that open line of communication, I'm not just throwing feedback out into the universe. It is truly being heard, reviewed, and implemented. And it's just keeping that open dialogue that, hey, we're going to get here. It's not going to be tomorrow, but work with us. And let's make sure that what we are putting forward is creating the change that you're looking for. So putting in approach, putting in strategy, but then also reflecting, pulsing, and making sure that those efforts are hitting the audience the way that you're looking for it to.
So, the great resignation, right? During COVID, people left. And, one of the things I realized as a coach is people's values, that what they wanted and what they valued weren't resonating with company values. Bottom line profit, people didn't care during the pandemic. They wanted to, work from home or whatever the situation was. How are you now squaring that up as a director of people with, now we're coming back to a hybrid environment and, top down, right? Bottom up. How are you having those conversations? Is coaching helping that? Are you deploying mentors? What are you doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Mirakl specifically, we are very much in a scale-up environment. So while we have a good foundation of process, not everything is super defined, and there is always ambiguity of just managing uncertainty in our business. We don't always have the clear next step. So when you talk about, creating that environment where it's coming from the top down, it's coming from the bottom up, enabling your teams to manage through that change and manage through the ambiguity, has been super critical for us as a business. And, I think, that again, that scale up environment, you're trying to complement it in a way that, again, our processes are fluid, but we have these outside resources to lever on and to pull on when needed, and to enlist when, we're heading into that season of change.
Excellent. Excellent. I love the fact that you're fluid, you have outside resources, right? You remain flexible. We don't see any questions coming in. So, Gina, what didn't I ask you that you think is important that you want to share here in this conversation?
Yeah, I think, again, I mentioned it earlier, like, we are human. I am a person. I have my own bias that I'm trying to counteract. And while I think I have the right path forward, it isn't necessarily always the right. I'm an individual. I have my own needs as an employee. Sometimes that bias can get in the way. And I say, no, we need to have free lunch. Everyone lives free lunch. And, on the counter side, everyone wants coaching. They don't care about the free, sandwiches. So, putting forth the strategy, but also understanding you can't define it yourself. So looping in the leadership at the business, what's going to make most sense for your team? Again, they have their own preconceived idea of what it should be. Looping in that bottom, part of the organization too, and getting that lower level talent embedded in, sharing that feedback, making sure that what you're doing is best resonating with them. We're going through an office move as an organization, and while, employees don't necessarily get to pick the location that we're going to move to, and if it has a roof deck or not, they can get to dictate what the environment looks like and what the perks and benefits that they're walking into when they come into that office. So, set the strategy, know there's integrity in the view that you have, but also be flexible in a way that you're getting a well-rounded perspective. You have something that's touching upon every tenure or type of individual, their background, their gender, their race, their ethnicity, and that you're just creating an environment, but that, you put something in motion, it works for some time. It's not necessarily going to work forever. So that constant reflection is always going to be necessary, no matter if you're a year in business or, 300 years in business.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I have one last really tough question for you. I hate to do this to you, but I'm going to ask you a toughie here. So, as a coach, the one question you didn't ask me that I wanted to be asked was, as a coach, sometimes, in my quiet moments, I think, why doesn't every team in America have a coach? It does not make logical sense to me.
Yeah.
Submarines, I was on submarines, I started, they have a coach. Golf pros, they have a coach. Golfers, basketball teams have a coach. Track teams have a coach. Debate teams have a coach. Like everybody's got a coach, right? And because of course you're trying to achieve something and you're trying to achieve an outcome. And so Gina, why doesn't every corporation have a coach? I mean, bottom line is at risk, right? Profit. So from your perspective, why is that?
I think a lot of it comes down to experience. I think they probably haven't been in an opportunity where they have had a coach that has enabled them in a way from a leadership. And so sometimes it's, well, I've been successful without it. Why do we need to embed this at the team? I think the other argument is budget, and looking that we have all these resources internally, we're putting on all these programs. Why do we now need to also add this in too? So if you can, work with that budget and what the return is and what the impact of the business is going to be and how this is, it's individual development, but at the end of the day, it's at the health of the business. Talent is what makes your business successful. It's never not going to be the case. But to complement it with, it is still a new concept for businesses that are getting over the hump of why we're doing this and how mentorship programs internally can't be a solve for, so that's how I see, getting over the hump of just educating. Pilots have been a great byproduct for us on many scales, not just with coaching, with any performance management change we're making. Let's do it on a small scale, see the good students, see the more challenging students, and what's the outcome. So don't be scared to not have to go full-fledged. You can chunk it down into a smaller size project, just to go, again, to show some of that quick impact that some of the programs you're looking to enlist, specifically coaching being one of those.
Yeah, I love what you said about pilots, right? The pilot, setting up a pilot. So Gina, how much would you have paid for coaching? So John asks a question. I won't make you answer that one. I believe part of the reason most organizations do not implement coaching is the old ideal of stick with what works, right? Implementing change normally sees much resistance.
Yeah.
And so any last thoughts about how you were actually able to get Mirakl to implement a coaching program? How did you?
So, we are co-founder led. So we are still very much entrepreneurs. We ask people to be creative, but we are also disruptors. And so I think what has really helped for Mirakl is that if we don't disrupt our talent and our strategy, someone else will. And these key talent, these people who have made our business so successful, are going to go to those businesses because they offer those robust environments. And so for us, we are disruptors, we are risk takers. And so there is a little bit more of a buy-in for what the people team is recommending, because they understand the importance that we play at an organization. But baseline, if you're not willing to I think it was an Amazon quote, if you're not willing to disrupt your business, someone else will. And I apply that same philosophy to talent. If you're not willing to disrupt the environment and community, the engaging, workplace that you're putting on, someone else is going to offer that opportunity. And it's usually low investment for what, the impact can be when those key talents do end up leaving your business.
I love what you said about how you embraced your value of we're a disruptor, right? And so therefore we need to do the same for our culture and our people. We need to offer something here to actually gain the traction that we need to move forward, to continue to be the business disruptor over here.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. I mean, I think we're good. I mean, do you have anything else?
No, this was a really great conversation. I'm very passionate about my career. And so any way that I get to have open dialogue like this or just share some of my perspective is always a great opportunity. I really appreciate the time today and everyone joining us.
Yeah, thanks for your knowledge. Thanks for being vulnerable and sharing. I really appreciate it. Gina is on LinkedIn, believe it or not. So if you have a question or you want to follow up with her, please feel free to do so. I am a coach with AceUp. So please reach out as well. Love to have a conversation. Gina, thank you for your commitment to this conversation today.
Yeah, well, thank you for the guidance and partnership, Paul. It's been wonderful to work with you. And I think this kind of brought it full circle for us. So very
Awesome.
happy to be here.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.